Well, we're going to wrap up our series called Living in the Light from the book of 1 John by talking about how light brings discernment. Now, discernment is simply having proper understanding about things, seeing things clearly, making good judgments and assessments on things so you don't get duped. And this is never more important than when it comes to spiritual truth. You see, John is writing in the beginning of 1 John chapter 4 because there was all kinds of spiritual lies floating around in his day, all kinds of false teachers and false prophets saying things about God that weren't true. And so he begins chapter 4 by saying this in verse 1. Dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit. You must test them to see if they have really come from God, for there are many false prophets in the world. Now again, John starts out with this simple idea saying we need to test spiritual claims. When someone comes along and claims to speak for God or bring spiritual truth, we shouldn't just believe it, we should test it. And this is important because a lot of us feel like it's a little bit ungodly or unspiritual to question truth, to question teachers, to question maybe what we were raised with. But John says, no, it's very important that we don't just believe anything, but that we are testers of spiritual truth. And he says this is so important because there are all kinds of false teachers out there in the world today. And we shouldn't be surprised by this because Jesus warned us that this would happen, and we saw it in John's day, and we continue to see it in our day. Still to this day, there are all kinds of false ideas and false teachings thrown around out there. And I encourage you, if you're not familiar with some of those, check out our document called 5 Common Heresies today to kind of get your mind around some of the false teaching that's out there today. But again, John wants us to make sure we understand that we don't just believe things that are out there because they're popular or maybe because we were raised in them. We need to question and test spiritual truth. And so the question is, well, how do we do that? How do we test spiritual truth? John doesn't mean that we should just go around being grumpy skeptics all the time, but he gives us a specific way in which we should test the truth, and that is by using the Bible. We test by using the Bible. Here's what he says in verse 2 of that same chapter. This is how we know they have the Spirit of God. If a person claiming to be a prophet acknowledges that Jesus Christ came in a real body, that person has the Spirit of God. But if a person claims to be a prophet and doesn't acknowledge the truth about Jesus, that person is not from God. You see, what John does here is he uses a specific Bible test. You see, in his day, the false teachers were claiming that Jesus didn't have a real body. He was some sort of just a ghost floating around out there. But that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that Jesus really was a human being, God in flesh. And so what he says is, if somebody teaches something, but it goes against what is taught in the Bible, that person is not from God. And so what he clearly lets us know is that if we want to test spiritual truth, we do it by the Bible. The Bible is the ultimate test to determine whether or not something is true or not. Now, see, that's important because notice what he doesn't say when it comes to testing spiritual truth. He doesn't say, you know what, just pray about it. Just follow your heart. Go with what sounds good to your gut. He doesn't say, just believe what you were raised with. He doesn't say, just believe those who are in authority over you. Now, praying about things and having that feeling in your heart, looking to authority, there's nothing wrong with those things, but they can't be the final authority. The Bible is the final authority. And if any one of those things goes against what the Bible teaches, well, then we know that truth is not from God. You see, the Bible clearly teaches about itself that it is inspired by God, and it is what is used to correct us and to lead us into truth. And so the final test for all spiritual teaching is the Bible. Now, here's the challenges. The challenge is sometimes when we discover spiritual truth in the Bible, it might not be popular. It might not be easy. It might challenge our own ideas and presuppositions and values, and it might make some people mad at us. But here's the final thing I want us to see. We need to be willing to side with God. You see, he ends this section of this chapter by saying this in verse 4. But you belong to God, my dear children. You have already won a victory over those people because the Spirit who lives in you is greater than the Spirit who lives in the world. Those people belong to this world, so they speak from the world's viewpoint, and the world listens to them. But we belong to God, and those who know God listen to us. You see, what he does here is he makes this contrast between the world and God. And he says, the teaching of this world, a lot of people are going to like it and they're going to follow after it. But just because it's popular in the world doesn't mean it's true. Because we need to understand that sometimes God's truth butts up against what the world teaches. And so John says, be willing to stand with God's truth, even if it's not popular, even if it's hard, even if it's different than what other people around you believe. If it's clearly laid out in the Bible, we need to side with God's truth there. So John gives us this strong encouragement that if we're going to live in the light, we need to be discerning people. And the way we discern spiritual truth is by testing everything that is taught by the words of the Bible.